Foundation Level Objective 1.1.1 K1. Identify typical test objectives. The 3 questions in the 4 sample exams about testing objectives make us believe that there's a 75% chance of getting a question about testing objectives in the exam. We mentioned 9 testing objectives, but we don't need to memorize the 9 testing objectives. The 3 questions ask about a valid testing objective, so there'll be 3 wrong objectives and only 1 correct test objective. Most wrong testing objectives will be about something against the 7 testing principles, a misconception about understanding validation and verification, or even the difference between errors, failures, and defects. By understanding those concepts, you don't need to memorize the list of testing objectives. For example, finding every defect or every failure is against the first principle. Testing shows the presence of defects, not their absence. So let us look at the answer options of the first question. We can see option A, to prove that there are no unfixed defects in the system under test. This is against the first testing principle. Testing shows the presence of defects, not their absence. We can't prove that there are no more defects in the system under test. Option B, to prove that there will be no failures after the implementation of the system into production. This could be against the first principle as well. However, this is against the 7th principle. Absence of errors is a fallacy, as we are talking about finding defects after production, which means that the defect is most likely found by the customer. Option C, to verify that there are no untested combinations of inputs. This is against the 2nd principle. Exhaustive testing is impossible, as it's impossible to test every combination. That will leave us with option D. To reduce the risk level of the test object and to build confidence in the quality level, which is a legitimate testing objective. So the correct answer is D. The second question is more tricky than the first one. Looking at the answer options. Option A, validating that documented requirements are met. Here, they are playing with words and testing your understanding of the difference between validation and verification. Remember, validation is doing the right thing and verification is doing the thing right. And validation always has something to do with the customer or user. Here, we are implementing the documenting requirements and making sure that the product meets those requirements. Is there a customer involved? No. You might say that those requirements were taken from the customer, correct? But are you sure you understood the customer correctly? So, the documented requirements might not accurately represent what the customer or user asked for. Even if that documented requirement represents what the user asked for, the final product might not solve the problem that the user wants to solve in the first place. So, in every case, the user should validate the final product. So, as long as the user or the customer is not mentioned, then it's not validation, and it would be verification. So, while verifying the documented requirements is a valid testing objective, validating the documented requirements is not a valid sentence, and we should validate against user expectations. So, option A is wrong. Option B, initiating errors and identifying root causes. Testing doesn't initiate errors. Dynamic testing tries to identify failures, while static testing tries to identify defects. Plus, no one initiates errors. Errors are made by humans unintentionally. On the other hand, identifying root causes is part of debugging and not testing. Option C, verifying the test object meets user expectations. This is the opposite of the first option, in which we talked about validation versus verification. Here, they are using the word verification when we are talking about user expectations. So the sentence is not correct. If we replace verifying with validating, the sentence would be correct and match one of the testing objectives. The last option, causing failures and identifying defects. This is a valid testing objective and probably the most common objective of testing. So, the correct answer is D. Now, looking at the answer options of the third question. Option A, finding and fixing defects in the test object. Finding defects is a testing objective, while fixing defects is related to debugging, which is not a testing activity. So this is incorrect. Option B, maintaining effective communications with developers. We do not test for the sake of making good relationships with the developers. Maintaining effective communications with developers is a good and healthy thing, but it is not the reason we initiate testing. Option C, validating that legal requirements have been met. Again, they are testing your understanding of the difference between validation and verification. As no user is mentioned here, then it's not validation. So, the sentence is wrong. It would be correct if we replace validating with verifying. The last option, D. Building confidence in the quality of the test object is a valid testing objective. That is the correct answer.